So I was asked by Max to spend a little time talking a little bit about the landscape, the media landscape in the United States. And as you can imagine, a lot has changed over the last 20 months, and it's just accelerated some of the trends that we have been seeing for the last 2 or 3 years. But obviously COVID accelerated many businesses, and one of the businesses that accelerated, of course, was the business of media. So, you know, if I summed it all up on one page, I think what you'll find is that in the world of video, there are 3 things that are happening, and none of them are particularly good for advertisers. One is that, you know, audio, that people are using 2 screens at the same time, which means they're using social media while they're watching television, while they're watching advertising, which means they're less engaged with advertising. They're now subscribing to non-advertiser supported media, which means that they're seeing fewer of our ads. And they're seeing a lot of these ads on computer screens or on the small screen, which makes them, again, less engaging. On the social side, what we're seeing is that as it seems odd to say this, but people are spending less time with social media than they have in the past. And that might be due to the toxicity of both Twitter and Facebook. And there are people who have just walked away from it. But regardless of that, Facebook is obviously the leader in ad revenue. But you're starting to see a little bit of Snap and TikTok coming up and taking some of their money. So as an agency, we're spending less and less with Facebook, and we're trying to invest more money with some of the smaller players. On the audio side, it's all about streaming as well. Spotify and Pandora are certainly the 2 companies that we watch in the space. And our expectation is that Amazon and Google will continue to invest money in their platforms. Print remains one of those mediums that is, challenged as much as, the older population enjoys their print. Inventory continues to decline there, prices continue to go down, and you're seeing most companies are especially companies like the New York Times, et cetera, are putting more money behind subscription-based paywalls as opposed to into their, the physical print of it. And of course, in search, that story is Google and will always be Google. So let's just talk a little bit about how people are consuming media in the United States. The reality is that, video is still number 1 as it relates to advertising supported, but digital, which includes some streaming services, there's more time spent there. So the amount of time in television continues to decline, especially in the younger viewers, and we expect that to decline in the future. And we do expect to see significant growth in the next 2 or 3 years in digital, primarily from the streaming services, as more and more people migrate away from the television screen or the television broadcast networks to SVOD services. And of course, what will follow will be more and more money spent in digital. It's good to be a digital king. Obviously, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Apple are the FANGA, are the big 5 in the US. And that's not changing. Just last week, Amazon made a significant purchase of about $9 billion to buy more and more content, and they are ramping up their video services, and we fully expect them to buy another broadcast network or to buy other services to either in the audio space or in the video space to continue to grow their services and eventually link that to e-commerce. So what happened during COVID-19? We did a lot of studies. We have found that 72% of all Americans believe that their lives will have a permanent impact because of COVID. That number will probably come down over time as people return to normalcy. We're already seeing in the US, we had a Memorial Day weekend, which is an important weekend in the United States. There are more people outdoors than ever before. There is what we call a return to normalcy, but regardless of that, having a 19-month, 20-month pandemic where we lost 500,000 Americans and counting, will have both an impact on the psychology as well as the economics of the United States. What we found that was interesting is that time spent with media increased dramatically during the first days of COVID. As you can imagine, with people at home, people tuned to the news, people tuned to other types of programming, the amount of time spent with video and other media increased dramatically. But we're already starting to see that decline as people are coming back to work, and the news cycle has changed to be more normalized, which has taken some of the impressions and some of the time spent out of business. The other thing that we found interesting again is engagement. We talk a lot about that as an idea as it relates to, is our advertising working? And what we're seeing is that engagement continues to decline over the course of time, and that's not changing. And as the U.S. consumer has more and more screens available to them and becomes more psychotic as they relate to, I need to have my phone open, I need to have the television on, I need to have the audio in the background, I need to have so much coming at me, that the reality is that our advertising is working less and less hard. And we're starting to see that in all the ROI numbers coming back from the studies that we do on media marketing, that ROAS and ROI is declining relatively quickly, and the cost of media is actually going up. So you put those two together, and we're seeing a non-positive trajectory of media performance. The other thing that we saw that was interesting was that people were subscribing more and more to SVOD services, which was, again, I think fueled by two things. One is a cutting of the cord mentality. You can actually save money by cutting the cord and subscribing to OTT. But the other reality is that the networks have stopped programming for broad-based television services. So they're investing all of their money and all their effort into their own SVOD. Disney, which owns a broadcast network, also has Disney Plus, and that's where they're investing their money. CBS or Viacom owns a company called Paramount Plus, which is they're putting their best programming. So the best of the best is no longer on free TV; it's now on SVOD services. So that's going to continue to push more and more people away from broadcast and cable television into paid performance or paid video on demand. And again, that's not good for advertisers and not really good for agencies either. So the reality is that it's going to be complicated, and it's only going to get worse as more and more people try these services. We're seeing it again on the younger audiences, but as this moves forward, this will also move into the older audiences as well. And we're just seeing every day subscription bases are going up, and more people are walking away from television. I'm just going to skip this. The other thing that's interesting is video gaming, which is something that we didn't think that would spike during the pandemic. Has spiked dramatically. So I'm not exactly sure what my people are doing at home while they're working, but it seems like they're watching television and they're playing video games. So if you look at the video landscape in general, we're just seeing a constant decline in traditional TV viewing. Broadcast prime, which used to be the gold standard of advertising, from 8 to 11 o'clock at night, the four broadcast networks had the largest viewership, and you can just see the decline we've had over the last 5 years, where if you're under the age of 35, you're virtually non-existent in terms of watching broadcast prime. And even the older demographics have lost a dramatic amount. If you're 35 to 64, it used to be a very easy place to reach a large audience, more than 2.5 rating, and now we're down to 1.6, which is a pretty steady decline. And then same thing in cable, a very consistent decline of audience in these paid for advertising moments. And it just goes on and on, that people are just leaving the traditional television set, and whether they're watching shifted or whether they're watching on a computer, all the live television, which is how we made our money as marketers in terms of reaching consumers, is becoming more and more difficult. And it appears that that trend will certainly not end anytime in the near future. And the other part that's concerning is that the younger viewers are just watching more and more on time shifted or on computers, and as they move through their lifespan, that's only going to continue and will continue to make it more difficult for advertisers to be successful in traditional video platforms. So when we talk to our clients, especially under the age of 50, not clients, but people who are trying to reach consumers under the age of 50, we're constantly recommending different types of media vehicles other than television, certainly not linear television. And OTT, which 5 years ago barely existed, is the only conversation we're really having about video. Every conversation starts with a company called Roku, which is an OTT provider. We talk about the streaming services. We talk about Amazon Prime. We talk about everything but linear TV, and that's because 70 million homes, which is more than about 70% of the U.S. population, have OTT. So when you think about that as a broad-based industry, it is just as large as many of the cable networks. So this business of OTT is mainstream and has to be managed accordingly with budgets that are appropriate to the size. A lot of clients have been doing test and learn over the last 2 years, and they've never taken a test and learn budget and really invested properly. And we're starting to see, I think in 2022, you're going to start to see that moment, that where clients say, what, television can no longer carry the burden of my advertising and my marketing. I now need to figure out OTT and invest accordingly. So if you're Roku, you're going to make a lot of money in 2022. It's good stock to buy. And if you look at it, obviously Netflix is the leader in this space, and Netflix does not accept advertising. But we're hopeful, hopeful one day that Netflix will do it, because that would change the entire media landscape if Netflix would just allow for 2 or 3 commercials an hour on their streaming video. Disney Plus is also a very large player in this space. They also don't allow advertising, but I do expect that over the next 2 or 3 years, Disney Plus will change their subscription VOD to an advertising-supported VOD, similar to what HBO Max is doing. The other thing to think about is that there's more to streaming than just the SVOD services. Hulu obviously is a major player, but there's this unsung hero out there that nobody talks about, which is YouTube. YouTube represents 25, I think about 25% of all the streaming in the US. And we're talking about billions and billions of views per week. And it's an amazing advertising opportunity that a lot of clients are still not comfortable with, because it's user-generated content as opposed to professionally generated content. But at the end of the day, if we're going to try to reach consumers, we're not going to have much of a choice. We're going to have to, dip deeper into YouTube, and it's a relatively inexpensive medium as compared to others, but it doesn't have the same sophistication that we feel that that programmatic programs on SVOD have. So there might be a play at some point, but it's still some time to go on YouTube and becoming a general marketplace platform. So the other thing that I talked about before was this lack of engagement. And if you look at the numbers, 41% of all people who are watching TV are also using social media. So imagine, and I imagine everybody on this call is probably doing that to me right now, using social media while I'm speaking. But I think we all know that we do that. A lot of simultaneous things are happening during the course of a television advertising pod. And again, that just continues to make television advertising, less relevant, more expensive, less engaging, and less valuable. So, you just go through it, no matter when it, no matter who it is or when they're doing to it, whether it's during radio or while they're watching TV, social media is becoming more and more important. And they're also doing it while they're working. So not only are they doing it, during, non-business hours, they're doing it during business hours as well. And that, if you think about a Zoom call, you think about, the lack of productivity that creates, it's pretty significant. So if you move over to publishing, I'll move quickly. The money is now being made on the digital side. If you want to subscribe to the New York Times, most people are, they are subscribing through the digital paywall as opposed to buying print, and that's just across the board. So they are now actually becoming more profitable than ever before. If you look at some of the 10K reports from the New York Times and the Tribune and other companies that are primarily newspaper driven, they're actually profitable for the first time in quite some time. But that's not because of their print platforms; it's because of the digital platforms. So there is hope for journalism in the U.S. So that's a great thing. It's just a question of how consumers are being delivered the news, and it's very different than it was 5 years ago. The audio landscape is changing dramatically as well. The AM FM dial, everybody still has them. That's terrestrial radio, but it's just not sexy anymore. Advertising on the local radio stations are for an advertiser, they rather talk about streaming. They rather talk about what are we doing with Spotify or Pandora or companies like that, as opposed to traditional terrestrial radio. And you're seeing that in the stock prices. If you look at the value of Spotify versus the value of iHeartRadio, which is a very large company in the US, it's not even close. And iHeart still makes way more money than Spotify does, except Spotify is the future of the business, while iHeart is just hanging on. And if you look at the numbers, it's happening slowly. But it's definitely happening where more and more consumers are tuning into Spotify, Pandora, and even if they're listening to, let's call it terrestrial radio, they're not listening through a radio device. They're listening through a streaming service. So they're going to Google and they're Googling their favorite station and they're listening through a smart speaker or an Alexa or something like that. And if you move into social, social is obviously, what we talk about a lot in the US. There's, Facebook and Instagram represent the lion's share of our spending. If you when we look at, our spending at the agency, I think we're still spending about 75% of every social dollar with Facebook and Instagram, which is considerable. And that's, and it still makes sense unless you're trying to reach the 12 to 24 population. The 12 to 24 population tends to skew towards TikTok and Snap, but regardless, you can see that the overall if there are 300 million people in the United States of America, 226 million of them are tied into some sort of social media platform. And while the numbers don't appear to have that much more bandwidth to grow, it's still pretty significant when 66% of the U.S. population is using a social network. So you can compare that to television that maybe has 50% on any given day. So social media is now the single largest media platform in the U.S., which you think about it happened in a relatively short period of time. And our expectation is that the amount of time spent with social media will come down over time, not dramatically, but we do expect to see that happening. Obviously, 2020, was a pandemic inflated boost, and again with a lot of this was also inflated due to the elections in 2020. So we do expect that despite the fact that 66 million people will be on social media. We're hoping that that number comes down a little bit in terms of time spent, because that really is a tremendous amount of time getting aggravated with your friends. In terms of spending, though, there's no question where the money flow is going, and you're looking at the amount of money being spent in digital growing another 50%. We expect that search will continue to grow as more and more clients realize that it's the lower portion of the funnel that's driving their sales. And we can talk a lot about attribution studies, but as branding becomes more difficult, we're seeing clients. I'm not saying that clients are giving up, but clients are realizing that the amount of effort to build a brand at an upper funnel area is becoming prohibitively expensive, where their competition and the competitive sets are all playing in the lower funnel. And you can do branding in lower funnel, but if you're driving e-commerce and you're driving some branding with a really good search campaign, it is much more viable from an investment ROAS perspective than buying a television spot and hoping that somebody sees your spot, goes to your website or goes to an e-com site and then makes a transaction. So unless the networks can figure out how to make it seamless, which is extremely complicated on the screen, and we've been testing this for years and we have not found success, the amount of money going into digital and search is going to increase exponentially. And again, this, we've kind of beat this to death a little bit, but as you can see, the transition to connected devices continues to accelerate. It accelerated during the pandemic, and that's not going to change. So the opportunity that we've had, in advertising the way it used to be, 15, 20 years ago, has definitely come to its glorious end. So I'm going to move forward. I'm at the appendix. So if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. Oh, anybody there?
Jason, thank you for this insights and nice presentation about media. We had the opportunity to see also the media usage in Serbia, which is slightly different, of course, than trends you showed for Western world. But there are some similarities. What was interesting for me in your presentation, many things, but I would ask for one specific situation. You said that 50 to 60% of population watch some streaming while working.
Yes.
So what does this mean for a quality of work and what for a human focus?
So my hope is that people are working, but until we get back to the office, I think we're going to see 50 minutes of work and 10 minutes of something else. And we're seeing a lot of that just from our productivity studies that we're doing, that people are working more hours, but they're getting less done. And I'm not sure if they're getting less done because they're doing other things at the same time and they're just not concentrating as hard as they should, or because they're not collaborating in a normal way. Zoom calls are interesting, but it doesn't really help real collaboration. It just moves a project along. So I think when we get back to the office, and we expect to be back in the office by September, that's our plan. And we hope that people will spend more time collaborating, more time in the office, less time on social media, and perhaps we move forward quicker in the economic recovery.
Okay, thank you.